Well, welcome in, propaganda people, and this is episode number 3 of our Gundam build, the Zgok. In this episode, well, we're going to set our Zgok aside because this is going to be all about building a scenic base for our figure. Well, let's just jump right in. Now, if you've been privy to any of our conversations between myself and Josh, my building buddy, you would know he will affirm this, that I have no idea what I'm going to build here, even at this stage as I'm starting to kind of construct some ideas. All I know is I want something that's got some dynamism to it. Is that a word? I want it to be somewhat dynamic. I want the Gundam to sort of, I guess I'm trying to express the scale because it is a big giant figure. Maybe something a little kind of whimsical along the way as well. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. But with the help of these pieces of foam, and yes, look at this, a piece of paper and a pen, I'm going to start sketching out some details here, just kind of start kind of the basic idea of a plan here. So what I have basically so far is I know roughly one side's going to be about 12 inches. That's as far as I've gotten so far. Front to back, about 12 inches. Now side to side, let's try to figure that out here. We'll lay some more pieces of foam here. I'm kind of convinced at this point, and you'll see this as it progresses, I'm pretty sure I want to add water features to this, so I'm trying to make some allowances for that as well, so that's kind of scrappy piece onto the left side there. Well, maybe that'll be like a river bank or something to that effect, so we'll kind of keep that in the back of our head as we start planning this going forward. And as you can see, I think I've come up with something around 9 inches on the front side. Well, as you can see, we've gotten a little bit further along with kind of the fruition, or the idea is starting to come together. Now you can see that the scene is, I don't know, starting to be composed here. We have that idea of maybe the Gundam stepping out of a river or a lake or some water feature. I've got some different elevations there, so that's going to give a little bit more of a dynamic type feel to the scene here. And just as a backdrop, I'm kind of settling on some sort of a rock wall, a cliff side, or something to that effect here. And I've got this kind of idea in my head here, which we'll kind of talk about here in just a few moments. But I think this is starting to come together. I do like the way that the Gundam is stepping up or stepping out of that trench or that water feature there. I think that's going to look nice. So, of course, as I build and kind of figure this out, we'll make a few sketches here onto these foam pieces. These will actually end up being the foam that I'll use to cut the scene itself here, so the base itself. So we'll make a few drawings here in order for myself to kind of put this all back together here in a little bit later date. But even with this planning, this very careful planning, I'm still a long ways to go. It's still a very foggy vision, that's for sure. But I'll make these marks here, and then we'll take these foam pieces, because these will be the ones that I'll start using in the final layup here. And this might change altogether, who knows, but I'll take it over to the hot wire cutter. We'll cut some of these pieces more to size here, and we can start getting a better sense of the size and the scope and the layout of the scene. And so without anything better in mind, let's just go ahead and start putting this together. You know, we could always do something different or change it later on. So we'll use hot glue, of course, just to kind of glue all these different foam pieces together. Super rough cut here. Again, we're just building a rock wall in the background there, so we can just kind of glue these in place. We'll worry about texturing these up a little bit later. I want to point out something. You might catch it in some of these shots. There's a hole in the back wall there. That's going to come in important here in just a little bit. You'll see why as we start moving along in this project here. But we have a trench in the front there, which will be our water feature, a lake or a stream or something like that. Now we have the basic rock wall in the back. We could set our Gundam in place there, see how he's starting to look. And yeah, that's pretty, I mean, I don't know. It's better than just a flat base, I guess, or sitting it on my shelf. Well, now I really have settled on that this will have water, so at least in that bottom area there's going to be a water feature. And remember that kind of cut out the hole on the back wall? Well, that's going to be a waterfall. I've decided I'm going to have a waterfall that drains into this lower section here. So one of the things I want to do is I want to start preparing these foam pieces and the basin in whole for resin, because that's what I'm going to be using to make my water features. And we've talked about this in the past. Resin and foam just do not match. They are not friends with each other, so I really want to seal this up, keep away that resin from seeping in or touching any of that foam, because it will literally just dissolve the foam and we'll have a yucky mess. Well, as you notice, I've really literally plastered the entire scene here, and that's actually done a nice job of unifying the appearance. So now I can actually see what I have. I don't have all these different shapes, drawing shapes and stuff. It's a unified color. It also solidifies the surface, so it makes it much easier to work with. And as you can tell, I've pulled out the blue bowl of good stuff, and inside I'm using some of those bark chips that I just collect. Those will become rock texture, at least the start of the rock texture, and then I'll use those textures and kind of continue their idea or their theme, their textures, if you will, sculpting into the Magic Sculpt just to extend those textures along the wall to create that rocky surface. And it doesn't take too long, and there we have it. We have a rock wall, and we have a hole in the middle of the front of the base. So let's see what we can do with this. Well, what we can do with it, what we need to do with it is, again, prepare for this resin. So we've already have this layer of plaster, but that's not going to do it here because it's still too porous. I could add more plaster, another layer perhaps, but I'm just going to go ahead and use Magic Sculpt. Just press that down over all these areas where I'm going to put the resin. In this case, this is that pond or the stream or whatever this is going to be here in the front. Just coating this entire inside with the Magic Sculpt because I know that that'll create an impervious barrier for the resin. Now with my basin in place, and that took a little while to dry, basically left it overnight. Now I can come back in and add some texture overall. I'm using AK Terrains. This is the concrete. It's got a great grit to it, so it's a nice texture. Plus, it has the added benefit of this wonderful gray color. So again, we're making a cliff or a rock wall here, so let's start with a rock type color here. Just spreading it on, using water just to thin it down a bit, and just basically slap it on everywhere, and then once again we're going to allow this to dry for a little while. Yep, it's slowing down here. This process is taking some time. And just one final step, and I'm not even sure this is necessary. I'm going to add a layer of Mod Podge. This happens to be a glossy Mod Podge, but more importantly, I worry about the resin and the foam, so this is just one more barrier layer, just one more level of protection here. For those of you tuning in and expected to see a ZGOC build today, I'm sorry to disappoint you because like I mentioned in the beginning, this is all going to be about the base, at least my part of it, but we can take a look at what Josh is doing, my build buddy, Cobrapla, and he's just finishing up with the weathering on his ZGOC, and gosh, doesn't that look wonderful? He's just beginning on his base as we speak right now, so next episode I'm sure we'll be able to see some sneak peeks of his progress. A special thank you to all my amazing Patreon members for your incredible support. Your contributions help me continue to create content for this channel. If you're not already a member, I invite you to join our Patreon community. As a member, you'll gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early releases, and more. I hope you'll consider joining Patreon and supporting this channel. Thank you very much. Okay, let's start bringing some color to this scene. So first off, now we're using that concrete texture paste, so we've got a great base color there. And over the top of that, just a really quick wash of highly diluted black acrylic paint, just brushing that on. And that, of course, just brings out some of these details, and all those little chips, those bark chips and little sculpting we did on the rock face really start to come to life. Now we'll really start adding some color to this scene. So on those areas where the water or the waterfall is going to be, just backing those up with some really blue, vibrant blue colors, even kind of a turquoise teal color here. And then overall, I'm going to kind of put a blue tint, even a purple tint to the rock work itself, because I want the Gundam, which has that blue type camouflage scheme, to blend in with its surroundings. So we'll take some blue tones and kind of add it throughout. And then this is where all that careful planning comes into place. So as I started mocking this up and started looking at it more, I'm going like, you know what? I think the water feature needs to be larger. And going against everything I've said before where I don't think the water, you don't necessarily should look into the sides of the water. Well, guess what we're going to do here? We're going to look into the sides of the water. So I'm going to cut away some of these areas here because what I kind of felt like I needed is that this water feature where the Gundam is walking through needs to be larger, needs to feel more expansive, like it's going someplace and coming from someplace. And the only way to do that is, one, to make it larger, the area larger. And I thought that by exposing those water, the depth of the water at the edges of the base, it kind of gives that idea that this is flowing off into someplace bigger, like a bigger ocean or a bigger lake or pond or something like that. So, of course, we cut away, and then it takes some time to kind of repair all these sections. Just doing the same thing over again, cut away the foam, add the Magic Sculpt, add some textures with the AK Terrain paste, the concrete, and now I'm coming back in, adding some of the paint work just to bring everything back into unity one more time here. But at this time now, again, we have water features that are bigger, and contrary to my best judgment and everything I said before, so I take it all back, we're going to look into the sides of the water itself. Jumping back to the rock work, this is a back and forth process. There's a lot of different layers here. So I'll let the water dry for a little while, the paint on the water for instance, and I'll just start working on rocks, just doing a little bit of edge highlighting here, bringing out some of those details. Again, I'm doing a little bit of exaggeration on this scene. I just think the Gundam itself kind of calls for bold strokes and bold colors, and like I said, a little bit of exaggeration. I don't want to say cartoony, but I think exaggeration kind of, just kind of captures the mood here. And now with all our adjustments in place, let's try this test fit one more time and see how things are looking, and not so bad. It's interesting because I'm actually keeping pretty close to that original theme when we first just started using the rulers and hunks of foam. So I'm now convinced I'm not going to throw away this entire idea, so let's go ahead and keep working on it. So yep, using some oil paints, and notice the colors, they're just shades of blue here. Just some very light washes, once again, this time using the oil paints over the rock surfaces, just to bring out that blue, those blue tones, and give it that vibrancy I'm looking for. Of course, I'll keep going back and forth with the colors and adding details to these rock facings, but I'm getting a little bit, what's the word here, anxious, excited? I have a waterfall that I want to try to put in place here, and I don't really know exactly how I'm going to do it. I do have an idea here, so let's get prepared to start pouring some resin. I suppose a good place to start is simply to add the barriers to the edge of the base itself, and for this I'm just using clear packing tape. Now what I'm going to do here is basically sticky side to sticky side and make just kind of a little wafer there. Cut that out in the same rough shape as the opening itself, and then using another piece of that packing tape, this will be the sticky side towards the base. I'll just stick that in there, and this will become my dam or my barrier for the resin. Nothing terribly fancy, or really not even much of a trick. I guess if there's really a trick is to keep that shiny side or the glossy side of the tape towards the resin so it just doesn't stick to the resin as you try to pull it away, and make sure that the sticky parts of the tape are really tightly secured along your base so that there are no leaks. Now for the waterfall. Let's see how this works. So my idea here is I have a plastic bag, this is a shopping bag from the grocery store. And looking at that, I was thinking, that almost, you crumple that together, that could be the foundation of a waterfall. It almost looks like water even at this early stage. So this is my attempt. This will be kind of my structure behind the water there. So I'm going to cut that to size. Remember that little hole on the top? Well, that's the area where the water is going to be pouring out of some underground stream that's coming and feeding this area here. Just a few tucks and turns and squeezes here, and I think we have at least the basic shape of a waterfall. Now we're going to start getting serious here. We're going to start pouring some resin. So once again, I'm using a AK resin here. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, so that's 2 parts resin to 1 part of the catalyst. And I'll be using these little syringes to make those measurements. And I'll do this into a paper cup because it's disposable, just adding those measurements into the cup itself. If I recall, on this first pour here, I think I had 20 milliliters of the resin and 10 milliliters of the catalyst. So those go into this paper cup, and then we'll just start stirring. And once again, stir somewhat slowly, I guess it would be. You don't want to agitate it. You don't want to add bubbles into it. Once again, it will go a little bit cloudy as you start to stir, but then once it clears back up, then you know that you're totally incorporated and you can start to pour your resin. And if you wanted to, and we'll do this a little bit later because we're going to be pouring multiple layers of resin, but if you wanted to, this is the stage that you would add some coloring. And oftentimes I'll just do that with a drop or even just a touch of acrylic color just added to the mix at this point to incorporate it overall. And now here we go. So I'm just going to set this on its back side here. That's my waterfall on the floor there on the ground level. And just pour the resin over the top of it. Now the idea here is basically I want the resin to permeate all the layers and the twists and the turns of this waterfall here. And then it will harden. So now we'll have a hardened waterfall, a resin waterfall, if you will, using the plastic bag as that substructure. So now at this point, it gets a little bit sticky, so you have to wait a little while, maybe even an hour, 30 minutes for sure. At that time, it gets a little bit sticky and it'll start to hold its shape and stay where you want it to be. So now all this has to dry. Every time you pour resin, you basically have a 12-hour dry time. So if you can time it right, you could do that, say, at the last thing at night and then start the next day and continue to work. And that's what's happening here. Now the next step here is the waterfall just with the resin on it just didn't seem quite as didn't have enough motion, didn't have the motion I was looking for. And so I started looking at videos, and the ship modelers with their waves crashing and things like that, I thought that's a great idea because oftentimes they use cotton just to show that motion, that spray. So I thought I would add that to the waterfall to give a sense of motion and spray and foam to my scene as well. And I have to say, I think it really did the trick. I think that looks, I think it's really coming together. I think that's starting to come, closer to what I have in my mind's eye for this scene, where it's going to have action to it, going to have movement to it. And so that waterfall is an important feature or important element in this scene in terms of kind of conveying that message. Now, as I mentioned, maybe in brief, maybe I forgot to mention it, but every time you're pouring resin here, or at least every time I'm pouring resin, we're basically putting everything aside for, it should be 12 hours. I'm rushing things here, so oftentimes it's 6 hours or 8 hours. But anyway, each layer takes quite a bit of time to cure before you are able to move on to the next. So even though right now I'm just adding this cotton to the scene, I still have to let the resin set up and cure because it's not quite cured yet. So that means that this base building business is going much slower. You really slow down. So as the Gundam was a press fit, kind of a snap tight sort of thing, and just kind of slam that out in an afternoon if you wanted to, building this base, that's stretching out into quite a bit of time. We're talking weeks here, which means that we're going to come to the end of this episode because we're basically at a stopping point. And so we'll pick this up right here next time as we'll continue to work on this base. So let me first say thank you to Cobrapla and his buddy build. It's been great working with him. We'll see much more of his work in the next episodes. Also, thank you to Show Me What You Bought, who provided the kits that we're using for this buddy build. And I'll leave you with just a few final images of this project as it started to unfold. If you enjoyed this series, please hit that like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support this channel even further, please come and join me on Patreon. Until the next time, everybody, take care and happy modeling.